Good evening. Tonight there is nowhere you need to be, nothing to finish, nothing to solve. For the next little while, simply allow yourself to drift toward a quiet place, where the sea moves gently, the air is cool, and time seems to slow with every passing wave. Imagine standing on a narrow path that winds through soft green hills. The grass sways lazily in the evening breeze, and tiny white flowers nod peacefully as if welcoming you. Ahead you can hear the ocean, not loud, not wild, just a calm and steady rhythm, wave after wave, breathing in, breathing out. As you continue walking, the path leads you to the edge of a quiet cliff. Far below, gentle waves brush against smooth rocks, creating a soothing melody that has echoed here for hundreds of years. In the distance, standing proudly against the fading sky, is a small white lighthouse. Its walls have been touched by countless seasons. Its windows glow with a soft golden light. The lighthouse is home to an elderly keeper named Thomas. Thomas has lived here for so many years that he no longer counts them. He wakes each morning with the sunrise. He watches seabirds circle above the waves. He listens to the wind as if it were an old friend telling familiar stories. His life is wonderfully simple. Every morning begins with a warm cup of tea. He opens the wooden door and breathes in the fresh ocean air. The salty breeze carries the scent of seagrass and distant pine trees. Sometimes dolphins appear beyond the rocks. Sometimes seals rest quietly on the shore. And sometimes, the sea is so perfectly still that it reflects the sky like a giant mirror. Thomas believes every day has its own quiet gift. Some gifts are tiny, the sound of a single bird singing before sunrise, a seashell resting in the sand, a cloud drifting slowly across the blue sky. Others are larger, a beautiful sunset, a gentle rain that waters the flowers, or a peaceful evening when the stars shine brighter than ever before. As the afternoon slowly fades into evening, Thomas climbs the spiral staircase inside the lighthouse. Each wooden step creaks softly beneath his feet. He has climbed these same stairs thousands of times, yet every evening feels new. At the very top, he carefully lights the great lantern. Its warm beam begins to turn, slowly, quietly, sweeping across the calm ocean. Far away, small fishing boats see the familiar light. Captains smile. They know they are safely guided home. The lighthouse has never hurried. It simply shines, patiently, faithfully, night after night. Thomas watches the last colors of the sunset disappear beyond the horizon. Orange becomes pink, pink becomes purple. Purple slowly melts into deep blue. Then, one by one, the first stars appear. He sits outside on an old wooden bench beside the lighthouse. A soft blanket rests across his shoulders. A warm cup of chamomile tea gently steams in his hands. The cool evening breeze whispers through the tall grass. Somewhere nearby, an owl softly calls into the night. The ocean continues its endless song. Wave after wave after wave. Thomas smiles gently. There is something beautiful, he whispers, about a world that never rushes. Above him, thousands of stars quietly fill the sky. And for a long, peaceful moment, it feels as though the entire world has fallen into a gentle, comforting sleep. The night passed quietly. The lighthouse continued to shine its warm golden light across the peaceful sea, while the waves whispered softly beneath the cliffs. Long before the first colors of dawn appeared, Thomas was already awake. He had always loved the earliest moments of the morning. The world felt different then. The air was cool and fresh. The wind carried the scent of salt, pine trees, and distant rain. Everything seemed slower, gentler, kinder. Thomas placed a small kettle over the stove. Soon, the comforting aroma of chamomile tea filled the little lighthouse. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup and smiled softly. Outside, the sky was slowly changing. Deep blue faded into gentle shades of lavender, then pale pink. Finally, a soft golden glow touched the horizon. The ocean welcomed the new day without a sound. Only the slow rhythm of the waves could be heard. After finishing his tea, Thomas picked up a small woven basket. Every morning he walked along the shoreline. Sometimes he found smooth stones shaped by years of gentle waves. Sometimes beautiful shells. Sometimes nothing at all. And he was perfectly happy either way. "There is always something worth noticing," he often whispered. "You only have to slow down enough to see it." The beach stretched for miles, untouched and peaceful. Tiny crabs hurried across the wet sand before disappearing into their little homes. A family of seabirds flew low over the water, their wings almost touching the gentle waves. Far away, a dolphin briefly appeared above the surface before slipping quietly back beneath the sea. Thomas stopped walking. He watched the water carefully. Nature never rushed. Everything moved with quiet purpose. As he continued farther along the shore, something unusual caught his eye. Near a cluster of smooth gray rocks, a small glass bottle rested where the tide had left it. The morning sunlight sparkled through the clear glass. Thomas slowly bent down and picked it up. It felt surprisingly heavy. Inside, there was a neatly folded piece of paper. He turned the bottle gently in his hands. The cork looked very old. Perhaps it had floated across the sea for many years. Or perhaps only a few days. There was no way to know. Very carefully, Thomas eased the cork free. The old glass made a tiny sound. Pop. He smiled. Even that little sound seemed peaceful. Slowly unfolding the paper, he noticed the handwriting. It was elegant, steady, beautiful. At the very top were only 6 simple words. "To the keeper of the light." Thomas blinked quietly. No one ever called him that. He looked around. The beach was empty. Only the waves, the wind, and the distant cries of seabirds. He looked back at the letter. The paper carried the faint scent of lavender. It felt almost impossible that it had survived a journey through the sea. He sat upon a smooth rock beside the shore. The gentle waves rolled in, then drifted away again. Taking a slow breath, Thomas began reading. The first sentence made him pause. "If this letter has found you, then the sea has chosen its path once again." Thomas lowered the page. For a long moment, he simply listened. The waves continued their endless conversation with the shore. The wind moved softly through the tall grass. Above him, white clouds drifted lazily across the brightening sky. Everything felt exactly as it had every other morning. And yet, something had quietly changed. Thomas folded the letter with great care and placed it safely inside his coat pocket. He wasn't ready to read the rest. Some stories, he believed, should be read slowly, one peaceful page at a time. With the basket in one hand and the mysterious bottle in the other, Thomas began the slow walk back toward the lighthouse. Behind him, the ocean whispered gently, as though it already knew. The next morning arrived wrapped in silver mist. Elias woke before sunrise, just as he always did. The lighthouse stood quietly above the sea, its stone walls glowing softly in the first light of dawn. Outside, the waves rolled gently against the cliffs, sounding almost like slow breathing. As he climbed the spiral stairs to polish the great lantern, something caught his eye. On the narrow window ledge rested a tiny white feather. He smiled. No birds could reach that window during the night. Carefully, he placed the feather inside a wooden box where he kept small treasures from the sea, a smooth shell, a piece of blue sea glass, and now this mysterious gift. That evening, the ocean became unusually calm. The wind disappeared. The waves flattened into shining glass, reflecting thousands of stars above. Standing on the balcony, Elias noticed a faint glow far beyond the horizon. At first, he thought it was another lighthouse, but the light moved, slowly, gracefully, like someone carrying a lantern across the water. He watched in silence as the glowing light drifted closer. It never reached the shore. Instead, it stopped far out at sea, shining softly before fading into the night. Elias whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are." For the first time in many years, he no longer felt alone. The lighthouse wasn't simply guiding ships. It was guiding hearts that still believed in quiet miracles. As midnight arrived, the great lantern glowed brighter. Inside lay the thick leather-bound logbook. The pages were yellow with age, carrying the scent of salt and cedarwood. On the very first page, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Every lighthouse keeps two kinds of light, one for ships and one for wandering souls." Elias slowly turned the pages. Each lighthouse keeper had left behind a single story, not about storms or ships, but about quiet moments that changed their lives forever. One had written about a lonely sailor who found hope after seeing the lighthouse. Another described a child who believed the sea whispered gentle songs on moonlit nights. Every story ended the same way. Keep the light burning even when no one seems to be watching. Elias closed the book for a moment. Outside, darkness settled over the sea. He climbed the spiral staircase and lit the great lantern once more. Its warm golden beam swept across the silent water. Far beyond the horizon, a familiar soft glow appeared again. This time, it lingered a little longer. Elias placed one hand on the old logbook and smiled. Perhaps every keeper had seen that mysterious light. Perhaps it had always been there, waiting for someone patient enough to notice. The sea remained quiet. The stars sparkled gently overhead. And somewhere beyond the darkness, another quiet light answered the lighthouse once again. The first light of dawn spread across the quiet sea, turning the waves into shimmering silver. Ethan stood at the top of the lighthouse, holding the weather journal close to his chest. The mysterious map from the night before still rested inside its pages. As he looked toward the horizon, something caught his eye. Far beyond the rocks, a small sailing boat drifted silently through the morning mist. There were no voices, no sound of oars, only the soft rhythm of the sea. Within minutes, the boat disappeared. Ethan blinked. It was gone. He hurried down the spiral staircase and searched the shoreline. But there were no footprints in the sand. Only a small wooden box rested on a smooth rock, as though someone had left it there moments earlier. With careful hands, he opened the box. Inside lay an old brass compass. Unlike any ordinary compass, its needle did not point north. Instead, it pointed directly toward the lighthouse. Attached to it was a tiny note written in elegant handwriting. The light does not guide ships alone. It guides hearts that have lost their way. Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through him. That evening, a fierce storm began. Dark clouds swallowed the sunset, and powerful waves crashed against the cliffs. For the first time since arriving, Ethan understood that this lighthouse had never been abandoned. It wasn't simply protecting sailors, it was protecting hope itself. As the storm reached its strongest, the lighthouse beam suddenly flickered. Once, twice, then it went completely dark. The sea vanished into blackness. Ethan's heart raced. Without thinking, he climbed the final staircase toward the lighthouse. As he reached the top, he froze. A shadowy figure stood beside the great light. The strangers slowly turned. Their face remained hidden beneath the veil. Then, in a calm voice, they whispered, "At last, the next keeper has arrived." The wind howled in the tower. The lighthouse door slammed shut, and the mysterious figure took one slow step forward. The hooded figure stepped into the warm glow of a small water lantern. To Ethan's surprise, the stranger was not frightened at all. He was an elderly man with kind gray eyes and a face marked by countless years beside the sea. "I've been waiting for you," the old man said softly. Ethan tightened his grip on the brass compass. "Who are you?" The old man smiled. "I was once the keeper of this lighthouse, long before your grandfather." The words echoed from the silent hall. "My grandfather never told me anyone else lived here." "He couldn't," the old keeper replied. "Some promises must be discovered, not explained." Outside, the storm roared louder. Rain lashed against the glass windows, while the great lighthouse lamp remained dark. The old keeper gently placed his hand on the ancient lantern. "This light has never been powered by oil alone," he whispered. "It shines because every keeper chooses hope over fear." Ethan looked at the silent lamp. "What do I have to do?" The old man pointed toward the brass compass. "It has already chosen you." As As Ethan held the compass close, its needle began spinning faster and faster. Suddenly, a warm golden light flowed from the compass into the heart of the lighthouse lamp. The entire tower trembled. Then, the beacon burst back to life. A brilliant beam of golden light swept across the stormy sea, cutting through the darkness like the first sunrise after a long night. Far below, ships answered with joyful horn blasts. Every captain had found the safe passage home. The old keeper smiled with a light pride. My time here is finished. A gentle breeze filled the lantern room, though every window was closed. The old keeper slowly faded into shimmering light, leaving behind only a single silver key resting on the floor. Ethan picked it up. Carved into the key were three simple words: the last door. Before Ethan could wonder what it unlocked, a deep rumble echoed beneath the lighthouse. Somewhere below the tower, a hidden door slowly creaked open for the first time in more than 100 years. Ethan took a deep breath, lifted the lantern, and began walking toward the darkness below. Whatever waited behind the last door was the greatest secret the lighthouse had ever protected. The stone steps beneath the lighthouse spiraled deep into the earth. Ethan held the lantern high as he followed the narrow passage. At the end of the tunnel stood an ancient wooden door, bound with iron and untouched by time. The silver key fit perfectly into the lock. With a slow turn, click. The last door opened. Beyond it was a vast underground chamber, unlike anything Ethan had imagined. The walls shimmered with thousands of moving seashells, casting a soft blue light across the room. In the center stood a round stone table. Resting upon it was a crystal globe no larger than an apple. Inside the globe, tiny waves moved as though an entire ocean lay within it. As Ethan stepped closer, the globe began to glow. Suddenly, gentle voices filled the chamber. Not frightening voices, but thankful voices. The light brought us home. It saved our family. We never forgot. The whispers belonged to sailors from long ago, people whose lives had been saved by the lighthouse across many generations. Ethan realized the lighthouse was more than a tower of stone. It carried the hopes, courage, and gratitude of everyone it had ever protected. Then another object caught his eye. Behind the stone table rested an old wooden chest marked with the same lighthouse symbol that appeared in his grandfather's journal. Inside the chest were dozens of letters, each carefully tied with a blue ribbon. The first letter read, "To the next king. If you are reading this, the sea has chosen you. The lighthouse is strongest when its keeper serves with kindness, never with pride." At the bottom of the chest lay one final envelope. Unlike the others, it simply said, "For Ethan." His hands trembled as he slowly opened it. Inside was a letter written in his grandfather's familiar handwriting. "My dear Ethan, if this letter has found you, then you have already discovered the truth. The lighthouse never belonged to our family. We belong to the lighthouse. Now its future rests in your hands. But one final journey still awaits you. Follow the light beyond the horizon, and you will find the greatest secret of all." As Ethan folded the letter, the crystal globe suddenly projected a beam of golden light onto the chamber wall. A hidden map appeared. At its center was a single mysterious island that had never appeared on any ordinary chart. Beneath it were four words: "Where every light begins." Ethan looked toward the distant sea. He knew his adventure was only beginning. Where every light begins. The next morning, the sea was unusually calm. Ethan packed only what he truly needed: the old journal, the brass compass, the silver key, and his grandfather's letter. As he stepped into a small wooden sailboat, the lighthouse behind him shone with a gentle golden light, as if wishing him a safe journey. The compass needle no longer pointed toward the lighthouse. It pointed beyond the horizon. For hours, Ethan sailed through silent waters. The ocean was so still that it reflected the sky like a giant mirror. No birds flew overhead, and no other boats crossed his path. Just before sunset, a thick silver mist rose from the sea. In the distance, a shadow slowly appeared. It was an island. As Ethan drew closer, he saw towering white cliffs surrounding the forest, unlike any he had ever narrow stone path led into the glowing forest. Ethan followed it until he reached an ancient circle of towering stones. At the center stood a crystal fountain. Instead of water, it flowed with pure golden light. Beside the fountain waited a woman dressed in a long silver cloak. Her calm smile carried the warmth of someone who had been waiting for a very long time. "You have come farther than any keeper before you," she said. "Who are you?" Ethan asked. "I am the guardian of the first light." She gently touched the glowing fountain. "This is where every lighthouse in the world receives its light. Every beacon that protects sailors begins here." Ethan stared at her. "So, this is the heart of them all." The guardian nodded. "But the light is growing." The glowing fountain flickered for the first time. A cold wind swept across the island. Dark clouds gathered over it. Far beyond the cliffs, a deep shadow rose from the sea. It was larger than any ship, larger than the lighthouse itself. The guardian's peaceful expression changed. "It has returned," she whispered. "The shadow tide." The sea began to roar, and for the first time Ethan realized that saving the lighthouse had only been the beginning. Now he might have to save everything. The shadow tide. The island trembled as the dark shape rose higher from the sea. Towering waves crashed against the white cliffs, and the golden fountain flickered with every thunderous roar. Ethan stood beside the guardian of the first light. "What is the shadow tide?" he asked. The guardian watched the horizon with quiet determination. "It is not a creature," she said. "It is the darkness born whenever people abandon hope. Every fear, every act of greed, every broken promise feeds its strength." The shadow spread across the ocean like a living storm. As it grew, distant lights began to fade. Far across the sea, lighthouses that had guided sailors for centuries started to dim, one by one. The guardian handed Ethan a small crystal lantern. Inside it burned a tiny golden flame. "This is the flame of the first light," she said. "As long as it burns, hope can never truly disappear." Ethan accepted the lantern with both hands. Its warmth filled him with courage. But before he could speak again, the shadow tide released a deafening roar. A massive wave raced toward the island. The guardian raised her hands, and a wall of golden light rose from the fountain, stopping the wave just before it reached the shore. Even so, cracks spread across the glowing barrier. "It won't hold for long," she whispered. Ethan looked at the lantern. Then he remembered the words from his grandfather's letter. "The lighthouse is strongest when its keeper serves with kindness, never with pride." Closing his eyes, Ethan lifted the crystal lantern high above his head. The tiny flame suddenly blazed brighter than the sun. Golden light swept across the island, the sea, and the dark sky. For a brief moment, the shadow tide stopped moving. From deep within the darkness, two glowing eyes slowly opened. A calm but powerful voice echoed across the ocean. "So, the new keeper has finally arrived." The sea fell completely silent. The shadow began moving toward Ethan, and the greatest test of the keeper had only just begun. The lighthouse by the quiet sea. The shadow tide glided across the silent sea until it stood at the edge of the island. Its enormous form hid the stars, yet its glowing eyes held no anger, only an ancient sadness. Ethan tightened his grip on the crystal lantern. "I won't let you destroy the light," he said. A deep voice echoed from within the darkness. "I did not come to destroy it." Ethan hesitated. "Then, why are you here?" The shadow tide slowly lifted one arm, and the sea became as still as glass. "Long ago," it said, "I was the first keeper." The guardian lowered her head. "It is true. Thousands of years earlier, the first keeper had protected the flame of the first light. But after losing everyone he loved in a terrible storm, he had fulfilled its greatest purpose. For the first time in many years, the sea was completely at peace. Days passed, and sailors from distant lands began arriving at the lighthouse. Each of them carried a different story. One captain spoke of surviving a terrible storm after seeing a mysterious golden beam. Another family told Ethan they had found their way home after being lost at sea for days. None of them knew who had guided them, but Ethan did. The lighthouse had never stopped shining. One quiet evening, as the sun disappeared below the horizon, Ethan heard a gentle knock at the lighthouse door. Outside stood a young girl, no older than 10. She held a small lantern in her hands. "I've been following the light," she said with a shy smile. "My grandfather told me this lighthouse helps people who have lost their way." Ethan smiled warmly. He was right. The little girl looked toward the endless ocean. Will the light ever go out? Ethan looked up at the great beacon glowing above them. Not as long as someone chooses kindness over fear. The girl nodded and carefully placed her little lantern beside the great lighthouse lamp. The two lights shone together, one ancient, one new. Far beyond the horizon, another faint light appeared, then another and another. New lighthouses were awakening across the world, each carrying the same promise. No matter how dark the night became, there would always be a light to guide someone. Ethan smiled as the evening breeze carried the sound of gentle waves through the air. His story had become a legend, and somewhere beyond another quiet sea, a new adventure was awaiting. The whisper beyond the horizon. Several peaceful months passed. The lighthouse continued to shine every night, and the sea remained calm. Travelers from distant shores often spoke of strange dreams, dreams of a golden light calling them home. One quiet evening, Ethan climbed to the lantern room just before sunset. Everything seemed ordinary. Then, the brass compass, which had rested silently on the wooden table for months, began to move. Its needle slowly turned, not toward the sea, not toward the island of the first light. It pointed to the sky. At that very moment, a brilliant star appeared above the horizon, brighter than any Ethan had ever seen. The lighthouse answered with a beam of golden light that reached toward the heavens. The entire tower hummed with ancient energy. A familiar voice drifted through the warm evening breeze. It was his grandfather. Every keeper believes the lighthouse protects the sea. But one day, every keeper learns the sea is only the beginning. As the words faded, a tiny feather of silver light floated down from the sky and landed gently in Ethan's hand. The moment he touched it, the night sky transformed. Thousands of glowing paths appeared among the stars, like invisible oceans stretching across the heavens. Each path ended at a distant lighthouse, not on Earth, but among the stars themselves. Ethan looked up in silent wonder. "The sky lighthouses," he whispered. Behind him, the crystal lantern glowed brighter than ever before. A new page appeared beside his grandfather. Only one sentence was written below it. "When the stars begin to fade, the skykeeper must rise." Ethan smiled. He had once believed his journey was about protecting a single lighthouse. Then he learned it was about protecting every lighthouse in the world. Now he understood there was an even greater world. Beyond the sea, beyond the horizon, beyond the stars, the next adventure was waiting. That night, Ethan could not sleep. The silver feather rested beside the crystal lantern, glowing softly with every passing hour. Just before midnight, the lighthouse bell rang. Once, twice, then 13 times. The air around the tower shimmered with golden light. Ethan stepped outside and looked toward the sky. A breathtaking bridge of stars had appeared above the lighthouse, stretching higher and higher until it disappeared into the heavens. The silver feather floated from the table and drifted toward the bridge. It was leading the way. Taking a deep breath, Ethan followed. With each step, the sounds of the sea grew quieter. The cool ocean breeze faded. Soon, only silence remained. When he reached the top of the bridge, he found himself standing on a small island, not surrounded by water, but by stars. Countless glowing lighthouses floated in the endless sky. each shining over a different world. An old man wearing a robe woven with starlight greeted him with a gentle smile. "Welcome, Ethan," he said. "I am the first sky keeper." He pointed across the endless heavens. "Every world has its own light."